Hello. One second. Oops, 1 second. I just I'm not sure if Diego, are you seeing the presentation?
Yeah, we see the whole.
Okay, cool. So hello everyone. I'm very thankful for being here today presenting my work at this Congress. I'm Irene Alcocer and I work at the Bioacoustic Lab with Diego Josia in the Autonomous University of Madrid in Spain. And what I'm going to be presenting today are the results of an acoustic meta-analysis study that me and my colleagues, Erlander, Larissa, and Diego, we conducted to evaluate how acoustic indices are effective proxies of biodiversity. So before going deeply into our study, I would like to briefly introduce the acoustic indices, which are a mathematical tool that relies on three aspects of acoustics, on 3 dimensions of acoustic: time, amplitude, and frequency, to summarize the heterogeneity or complexity of a sound recording. So as we can see here in the image, the biological information can be translated into numerical values, which in this case correlates with the number of species. So these indices are an interesting signal analysis tool that has some evidence of capturing biological information from sound recordings, and they are relatively easy to compute. So, and more recently, it has been showing interesting results on retrieving ecological information on large-scale studies. So, these indices have burst in the literature with almost 70 indices listed in 2018. However, despite their advantages, their interpretation is not that straightforward. And we are still lacking some standardized guidance or protocols about how to use them. So because of that, and because we realize that we are lacking of a statistical synthesis over the power of these indices to evaluate biodiversity, we conducted a meta-analysis to evaluate the acoustic indices as a direct estimators of biodiversity. We were also interested on their performance of estimating different facets of biodiversity. So what we did, it was firstly to gather a publication from 4 previous literature reviews from Schwer, Baston, and Sugai, and we updated the data to 2019. And as I said before on the introduction, there are many acoustic indices available at the moment. So we consider only papers which included the most alpha acoustic indices studied on ecoacoustic research. And because we were interested on the direct link with these indices with biodiversity parameters, we consider articles which, we consider articles with provided statistical or graphical information of the relationship of these indices. So we finally retrieved 35 articles. So we characterize each study, and we selected several moderators for the meta-analysis, which are different factors that might influence our effect sizes of the relationship. So the first moderator was the acoustic index, and the second one was the biodiversity parameters, and we were interested in this relationship. And we excluded all the moderators levels that had less than 5 studies, because the number of studies, low number of studies can bias the estimates. So we had at the end 7 levels in the acoustic indices and 4 for the biodiversity parameters. which were the species abundance, species richness, diversity, including sound index, symptom index, and speciesness, and sound abundance. And because we were interested in this relationship and how other biological variables can influence this relationship, we included also as moderators the diversity source of the biodiversity parameters and the environment. So we consider as acoustic those biodiversity parameters extracted from audio recordings, and non-acoustic those biodiversity parameters from field surveys. So because most of the articles study more than one index or more than one diversity parameters, our final dataset included 364 effect sizes. As you can see here, I'll plot them with their variance. So in this graph, we can see that effect sizes higher than 0 present a positive correlation between the indices and the biodiversity parameters. And the effect sizes below 0 represent a negative correlation. So on our meta-analysis results showed and positive and moderate correlation value between the indices and the biodiversity parameters. And we also found on the subgroup analysis with acoustic indices as a single moderator that the index H, NDSI, and ACI were correlating positively and significantly with biodiversity parameters. And in the meta regression, including all the moderators, they suggested that the acoustic indices can correlate better with sound abundance. But we conducted also a wild test and didn't show any difference between these parameters and the other biodiversity parameters. The meta-regression also showed there was no influence from the type of the environment or from the biological source. Another thing to consider from our study, it was that pseudo-replication was a common issue, and we treated that with an adjusted sample size, and then we conducted a meta-analysis including pseudo-replication as a single moderator, and we saw that there was our adjustment, it was good enough to pseudo-replication don't affect to our results of the meta-analysis. So additionally to the meta-analysis results, we also evaluated different variables from our studies, which were 35 studies which correlated the acoustic indices with biodiversity data. And we found that most of the studies were carried on in the United States, France, Australia, and Brazil. We also found that ACI was the most studied index, followed by H and ADI. We also found an unbalanced published literature where the studies were mostly focused on richness and sound abundance, mostly on birds, and also studied with ACI, as you can hear, it's the higher value. We also plotted the effect sizes over the time, and we found a decreasing tendency over the years. We had a more pronounced decrease values from 2007 to 2015. We found other trends on the literature. For example, the most common Windows lens, or whether on all the studies, were below 2 minutes. Although that continuous recording has been recently suggested as a better practice. The sample rate, it was usually related to the difference in focal organisms, animal groups, and however these parameters direct influence the spectral resolution of the acoustic indices. We found lack of consensus of noise treatment over the literature. And the biodiversity information was mostly extracted from audio recordings. The studies were focusing more on terrestrial environments and temperate regions, which are less saturated than tropical ones. And our studies representing 24% of the total studies that we found related to acoustic indices. So what we consider that can be influencing the moderated value obtained by the meta-analysis can be different factors. As we have to consider that acoustic indices reduce the entire acoustic dimensions into a single value, which might have some limitations. Other factors affecting the complexity of the environmental sound samples in real-world scenarios can be the natural noise and the anthropogenic noise, because they can mask the natural signals. And among others, some biological factors that might affect these two is the contribution of each species to the soundscape, as we've seen on the meta-analysis result that sound abundance can affect the acoustic indices. Also, the number of the signals produced by each species can affect it. Another thing to consider is the different calculations on the acoustic diversity indices, because they can be calculated as frequency beams or scalar vectors, or considering different amplitude values.
1 minute remaining.
Okay, I'm going to finish soon. So we think that we still have to increment our knowledge on how these indices retrieve the information, the biological information. So we think that addressing these previous issues will improve our understanding on the relationship with these indices and biodiversity, like pseudo-replication, the unbalanced literature over the taxa, and the biodiversity parameters. And probably we still need more study evaluating this direct link. Some new avenues of research that might be interesting, it will be to understand how indices can be complementing to be combined. Also, more collaborative science to develop open database to enhance the large temporal and spatial scales of study. Also, will be very interesting to increase our knowledge on how beta acoustic indices retrieve ecological information, and simulation might be a compromise to address the previous influence factors that I said before with human efforts. And also we have to continue looking for new techniques as machine learning. So further research of the relationship between acoustical communities and soundscape can complement and integrate with new techniques to provide a more comprehensive understanding of the use of these promising tools in biodiversity. I would like to say thank you to my co-authors, Erlander, Larissa, and Diego, and also to Camille for their valuable comments, and to the foundings, the Comunidad of Madrid, the European Union, and the Spanish government. Thank you all for listening.
Thank you very much, Irene. Really nice talk. We have some questions, some time for questions. Sorry. If you want to raise your hand and say something, or just write on the chat. Tom is asking if this work is already published or not.
No, not yet. We are on the path to, but not yet.
It's submitted, at least.
It's submitted, yeah.
Under review. Jerome, whenever you want.
Yes, I have no specific questions, but I would just congratulate you, because it was a very nice talk and very clear and very nice research. And I think it was very useful to do this review, this meta-analysis. that we should all be aware that we should use carefully these indices, and that we should always do a control pre-analysis to see how much the indices that we use really correlate with what we aim at monitoring, which is species richness, species population abundance, or anything. So thank you very much, and I hope to read your paper soon. Yes, very good.
Thank you, Swear. Jerome.
Another question from Ben Williams. Did you see differences in the effectiveness of indices depending on the habitat, aquatic or terrestrial?
No, we didn't see any influence of the type of the environment. So we think that this might be a good result because we can use acoustic indices in multiple type of environments.
Another question from Taylor Shaw, which is, I think, very interesting. What do you think is the main reason behind the effect size dropping over the time?
Yeah, that is very interesting. Well, I think as I try to summarize, I think there are many factors affecting this, the relationship between these indices and the biodiversity parameters. So we cannot just point out one specific factor. So because there are probably interaction between each other. So I think more research has to be conducted in this topic.
Another question from Lynn. Did you examine combination of indices?
No, we just examined a univariate correlation between a single index and a single biodiversity parameter, because we didn't have enough observations and studies to do that.
Any other question? Okay, well, thank you so much, Irene, for your talk. And we move